Hey everyone, and welcome back. So I know it's been a while since I've posted a video. It's been kind of a crazy month. So for those of you who don't know, I am a part-time history professor at the local university. As a professor, I like to talk, and I like to talk about history. So that's what this video is going to be. So, you know, what I'm going to be talking about today, I've noticed that the topic of corsets has been very popular amongst other costumers recently. And one of the themes that I have picked up on as far as conversations about corsets is there's a lack of discussion of what the working classes were wearing. Corsets. Okay. There are so many resources out there dispelling a lot of the myths that I'm sure you have heard and internalized about corsets and corsetry. I will link all of those videos down below for you to go and watch. So if you guys want to go and watch those videos and then come back to this one, that's awesome. So we're not going to be discussing the 18-inch waist. We're not going to be discussing having ribs removed. We're not going to be discussing the fainting and the health issues. We're just, no, that's not what this video is about. What this video is about is whether or not working class women, you know, the women working in the factories, working as maids and servants and working in the fields as farmers, whether or not they were wearing corsets or stays. There's a difference. If you want to see the difference, I will also be linking Abby Cox's latest video or most recent video on the difference between corsets and stays. So, but you know, whether or not these women were wearing support garments and what proof we have that they were wearing support garments. So there's actually quite a bit of proof out there. So just a few disclaimers before we just jump right in. The first is I'm going to be talking about mostly 18th century and 19th century. Those are my wheelhouses of study and interest. You know, most of my costuming is 18th and 19th centuries. So for the 18th century, I will be referring to the support garments as stays. That's what they were called. And then for the 19th century, I'll be referring to them as corsets. So what proof do we have that working women were wearing corsets and stays? We actually have quite a bit of proof. So probably one of the best resources that we use as costumers, other than original garments, is imagery from the period. So paintings, drawings, sketches, once we get into the 19th century, photography. So there's a lot of imagery out there of working women wearing support garments. So, you know, there's, sorry, excuse me as I scroll through my notes here on my laptop. But, you know, for the 18th century, we've got images from Paul Sandby, you know, probably one of his most famous drawings, paintings, watercolors that I love is the At Sandpit Gate Washing Day. It's an image from the early 1750s, but basically it's of two women working next to a huge hearth, washing clothes, and they're both wearing fully boned stays. That, you know, they've already taken off their gowns or, you know, their bed gowns, whatever they were wearing over top of the stays. So they're just wearing a shift, the stays, and a petticoat, and caps. but it's a wonderful image of working women wearing a support garment, especially a heavily boned support garment. So, you know, if you're doing laundry, especially the way that 18th century women had to do laundry, there's a lot of, you know, lifting and hauling and bending over involved. So these washer women basically wearing stays points to one of the advantages of wearing support garments is it gives you bust support, but it also gives you back support. So you bend in a different way whenever you're wearing stays or a corset. You bend from the hips rather than from the middle of your back, and so there's less strain on your back, especially when you're in a constantly like bent over position, like Russian pose. So, you know, there's that image. There's tons of images from William Hogarth of especially like prostitutes and lower class women wearing stays, or in the case of some of the prostitute pictures, they aren't wearing the stays, but you can see that there's a pair of stays like sitting nearby that have been discarded. So, you know, there's those images. Frances Wheatley, the Sailor's Return image, that's from 1786. That's another good picture of a, you know, lower class woman wearing a pair of stays. Those are some of the 18th century. And if you like go in and Google images of like 18th century working class and you scroll through them enough, you will find more images of women either wearing just their stays and a petticoat and a shift, where, you know, they've taken off their gown or their outer garment, or you'll see images where women are very obviously wearing some sort of support garment. You know, the bust is usually, you know, flattened a little bit. The body is in a very conical shape. That's the goal of wearing the stays, was to mold your body into this certain shape. Also how they are holding themselves in these pictures. You hold yourself differently whenever you're wearing a support garment from a particular period. So those are some of the context clues that we can look for 18th century imagery. Now for the 19th century, we have the advantage of photography, because one of the disadvantages with the 18th century imagery is their paintings. They are drawings, they're, you know, inked drawings, they're watercolors. And so the artist, whoever is making those pictures, can basically fiddle with the imagery just a little bit to make them idolized. You know, make these women look the way that an 18th century woman is supposed to look, whether or not they look like that in real life. So, you know, there is that disadvantage to the 18th century imagery. Now with the 19th century, photography becomes a thing. So photography, you catch what you're looking at as realistically as you can. Now another disadvantage, you know, at least with photography, is a lot of photographs were staged for the 19th century. The Victorians just loved faking stuff. So, you know, that is one of the caveats to the 19th century photography, is what is staged versus what is real. But even then, as you look at photographs from the 19th century of working class women, you can tell either by the way that their clothes are shaped or by the way that they're holding themselves in these pictures, that they're wearing some sort of support garment. So, you know, if they're wearing tighter clothing, you can tell, like, there's, you know, there's some firmness there. But, you know, if they're bending over a particular way, doing a particular task, like if they're bending from the hips rather than the waist, you can tell there's something there that is making them not able to bend from the waist. So those are just some of the context clues, once again, for 19th century photography. So one of the caveats to 19th century photography is the styles of clothing that especially working class women were wearing. Looking at images of working class women from the 19th century, it's very hard to tell for sure, for a majority of these images, whether these women are wearing a support garment. And that has to do with the style of clothing. So they're either wearing very loose-fitting clothing, which was common among the working classes and the lower classes, because you couldn't afford to go out and buy a new pair of pants every time you got pregnant. So, you know, you had to have clothes that were more adjustable. But also with the 19th century, you have the gathered bodice, where the front of your bodice is gathered both here at the shoulders and down at the waist. And so there's no fitting to it. It's not as tailored. And when wearing a gathered bodice, it is harder to tell if you're wearing a corset or not. So, you know, that's just another one of the drawbacks of, you know, the 19th century and photography. But there are some really great images out there from the 19th century where you can tell that these working class women are wearing some sort of support garment. Now, the other bit of proof are inventories. So, you know, these are things like, you know, estate listings, wills, you know, damage inventory. You know, if your house burns down, you know, you're going to list all of the things that you had in your house, but also court records. So I'm just gonna have to tell you guys right now, one of my absolute favorite books for researching the lower classes and the working classes is John Styles' The Dress of the People. I love this book. This is where I got a lot of the 18th century information from, especially regarding the inventories. So, you know, in John Styles' book, he mentions a fire that happened in Suffolk, in England, particularly in a little town called Brandon. This was 1789. And basically this fire, like, it wiped out almost an entire street. Well, in that street, it was like this, you know, for lack of a better term, like block of townhouses. But there was a mix of both, you know, middling class and lower classes living there. And so everybody, because they had lost so much in this fire, everybody put together a list of what they had in their homes at the time, because one of the things that we often forget as modern day people, especially in the age of fast fashion, is clothing was an investment for these people. And so, you know, clothing, and this is one of the things that Styles brings up in his book, is, you know, these folks, they would purchase clothing, they would invest money in good clothing, and then if they came upon hard times, they could then sell that clothing in order to have some money for food. So clothing was an investment. So if you lose everything to a fire, you're going to list the clothing that you have and the value of that clothing that you had, that you lost in that fire, you know, in order to try to get some of that money back. So in this Brandon fire that happened in 1789, there's quite a few working class women that are listed as having a pair of stays that were lost in this fire. The first one, she was just listed in the records as the wife of John Neal, who was a cordwainer. So working class, but she was listed as losing one pair of boned jumps in the fire. So I know jumps are like probably one of the most controversial garments for 18th century, but basically jumps were a lightly boned version of stays. That's like the basic definition. And then one Elizabeth Cooper, who was a mantua maker, she lost a pair of boned stays in this fire as well. So once again, a working class woman. Now she's not doing the hard physical labor that, say, you know, a farmer's wife would be doing, but she's still working class, which means she's not gonna be able to afford, you know, the luxurious silk robe de française, you know, or anything like that, but she's still wearing a pair of stays that is still molding her body into this fashionable shape. That's one of the important concepts here. We'll get to that later. We've got the inventory from the Brandon Fire of 1789. Another inventory that we have that Stiles talks about in his book is the accounts for a Robert Heaton, or Hetton, sorry. And he was listed as having 28 female servants in his house, mansion, really. If you have at least 28 servants, yeah, you have a mansion. But out of that 28, and over the years that Mr. Hetton kept this inventory, 6 of his servants bought new stays. So new, it's, you know, you're going directly to a stay maker, they're taking the measurements, they're making you a brand new pair of stays for you. So they're going to be very expensive. 8 of those 28 bought old stays, so they're secondhand. So they're going to be lightly used, so they're going to be a little bit cheaper. They're going to be a little bit more affordable for these working class women. Now, out of the rest of that 28 female servants number, you know, the only thing that we have is to assume that either these women weren't wearing stays at all, or they were, but they just didn't have to replace them while they were in service with this particular Robert Heaton. Another part of John Stiles' book is he mentions that, you know, a person who's writing about these secondhand clothing shops, these slop shops in London, is that a pair of basically used stays could last you anywhere from, I think, 3 to 6 years. That's wearing them, you know, every day or almost every day. It's very possible that most of these women that were in service with Robert Heaton just didn't have to replace their stays. Now, another type of inventory are criminal indictments. So these are available, you know, with the Old Bailey records, and once again, this is another one that, you know, John Stiles brings up for, you know, looking at working class clothing. But very few stays are being listed as stolen in these criminal indictments. And there's a couple different explanations for that. One is that these women only owned one pair of stays, and so whenever the rest of their clothing was stolen, they were probably out wearing their stays. The other thing is, you know, some working class stays were probably just in such shabby condition or made of such cheap materials that they weren't considered valuable enough to steal. You know, most people who steal stuff, they're gonna resell it. So you wanna make sure that you grab something that's gonna get you some money. So there's that explanation, but then also there's the explanation that if these women did have more than one pair of stays, that the extra pair might have been tucked away safely somewhere where the thief, being indicted in these criminal records, just didn't find them. So there's a couple different explanations for that. So as far as the 19th century and inventories, I wasn't able to find a whole lot of information, as far as wills or estates or anything like that that listed corsets. But something that we have to keep in mind is the 19th century is whenever we start seeing mass-produced clothing. And so the mass production of clothing, especially corsets, means that they're going to be a lot cheaper. They're going to be a lot more accessible. So with them being cheaper, they're not going to be worth as much, say, if they were lost in a fire or stolen or anything like what we see in the 18th century. So the other thing is, as far as, looking at inventories, some of the things that I have come across in my own personal research is I've seen shop ledgers that mention basically the ingredients to make a corset. So one shop ledger that I came across recently, it's in a private collection, so unfortunately I won't be able to really list it here. But it's from a small town here in West Virginia, and one of the entries lists, amongst so many other things, corset drill. So corset drill is basically it's a fabric meant specifically for making corsets. It's a very strong fabric meant for making support undergarments. Now this store ledger, it is from 1867, so a little bit later in the 19th century. But looking at those types of sources for the 19th century is another good place to look. Look at store ledgers and see, are there the ingredients listed to make a corset? Things like a specific type of fabric or boning or any of this other stuff. So, unfortunately, that was one of the limitations that I came across while researching this video, was just there not being a whole lot of digitized resources out there. In this world of pandemic, it's not like I can go to a particular place and look at these things themselves. So that is one of my limitations here, is just being able to find resources that I can access on the internet right now. So please do keep that in mind as you continue watching the rest of this video. So, definitely taking a look at different types of inventories. And there is a lot of reading in between the lines that has to take place there. And just kind of putting puzzle pieces together. So now we come to the most definitive, but also the most difficult bit of proof that we have for working class women wearing stays or corsets. One of the issues with extant garments, so original garments from that time period, is a lot of working class garments just don't survive. So there's a thing called survivor bias in museums. And this is something that we really have to be careful with whenever we're talking about historical clothing and historical costuming, is we'll look at all of these beautiful gowns that are in these museums with the little teeny tiny waists and blah, blah, blah. And we automatically assume that, well, all women during this particular time period you know, had little teeny tiny waists, or all women had their gowns made this way, or all women wore this style, or we make these generalizations based off of a few gowns that survived. But these few gowns, they were only worn by a few women. And there's a whole bunch of other videos out there about, you know, survivor bias and, you know, why a gown was kept and saved instead of being reworn until it just fell apart, or, you know, reworked until it just fell apart, you know, being cut down for a younger daughter or whatever. So a lot of working class garments just don't survive, but there are a few that do. This brings us to the darling of the historical costuming community, especially for anybody who does late 19th century. And that's the Symington Corset Company's Pretty Housemaid corset. So this is a corset that was specifically advertised and specifically marketed to working class women, especially women who were working as servants in households. So there's very little actual like boning in it. Most of what gives it its shape is either the way that the fabric is cut or cording. So it still molds your body into the fashionable shape, and it still gives you support, but it doesn't have all of the heavy boning in it that restricts you from moving around like a normal corset does. So the Pretty Housemaid, that is definitely, you know, a major example for working class corsets that are made specifically for working class women. And this was a very popular corset because it was flexible, it was comfortable. So we've got the Pretty Housemaid. But then we also do have examples going back to the 18th century of leather stays. So these are stays that are made out of leather. There's no boning. It's just a thick piece of leather that is cut into the particular shapes of a corset and then just laced up around the body. And there are so many original examples of leather stays that have survived. So, you know, we do know just from many other sources that working class women were wearing leather stays. Cutting a couple pieces out of leather is a heck of a lot cheaper and a heck of a lot easier than, you know, cutting out pieces of fabric and sewing boning channels and putting those pieces together and making sure it fits. And anybody who has ever made a regular set of stays or a corset knows exactly what I'm talking about. Leather stays would have been cheap, they would have been easy. So, you know, once they, you know, just got wore out, you could very easily replace them. So leather stays were a very popular option for working class women in the 18th century. Now, because, you know, we can't do generalizations. We can't say all women did this or all women did that. There are exceptions to this working class women wearing corsets and stays. Like, there's women today who don't wear a bra. There were women back then who didn't wear corsets or stays for a multitude of reasons. So, you know, there were women that just didn't wear corsets or stays because they just weren't comfortable, or because the work that they were doing was too strenuous or to wear any sort of stiff support garment. But then, of course, we cannot talk about working class women without talking about women that were enslaved. So we do have records of slave owners giving their enslaved people clothing as part of their, you know, generosity. But one of the things that's always missing from, you know, clothing that is given to enslaved women is some sort of support garment. Usually they're given just the bare basics of clothing. You know, for 18th century, a shift, petticoats, and, you know, some sort of jacket. You know, going into the 19th century, you know, same thing. Basic undergarment, basic overgarment, with really no support garment being given. Now, the exception to that is going to be the women, the enslaved women that are working in the household. So the enslaved women that are going to be working as the ladies' maids or the house servants. So a lot of slave owners gave the slaves that were working in their home better looking garments than they gave, let's say, the enslaved people that were working in the fields. So, you know, like I said, the enslaved women that were working as maids, as servants in the house, we do have records of them being given stays and corsets and better quality garments, just to kind of keep up that good impression. Yeah. There is evidence out there of working class women wearing corsets and stays, but like anything dealing with working class clothing, it is very difficult to find hard evidence. So, you know, we do the best that we can with what we've got. But since there is enough evidence out there, you know, we can say that yes, there were working class women who were wearing stays, who were wearing corsets, who were, you know, investing in those garments. And they did that for multiple reasons. You know, to keep up with the latest style, to give themselves that back support and that bust support. You know, working class women today, we still wear bras, and I mean, some of us do, some of us don't. You know, we still wear bras. We still try to keep up with, you know, maybe not up to the minute fashions, but we still try to stay with the current styles. And there's no reason to expect that working class women back then did anything different. So, you know, despite there not being like oodles and oodles of proof, you know, not like there is with the upper classes, there is proof out there that working class women did wear at least some sort of support garment. So, this leads me into what my next video is going to be. It's going to be a 2-week challenge where I'm going to be wearing both styles of corset that I have now. I have a pair of 1780s stays that I made from the red threaded 1780 stays pattern, and then I also have a pair of 1860s an 1860s corset that I also made from a red threaded pattern. I'll link them down below as well. So what I'll be doing is I'll be wearing the 1780s for a full week, just doing whatever I'm going to be doing around the house here. You know, we're definitely putting up Christmas decorations and you know, doing all that fun stuff. But then I'll also be wearing my 1860s corset for the week after that. So 2 full weeks of wearing a corset every day. There's other challenges out there where folks have worn a corset every day for a month, every day for a week. So, you know, definitely go check those out. But basically what my challenge is going to be is wearing a corset, but still doing, you know, the working class woman stuff from these different time periods. So working around the house, doing laundry, cooking dinner, putting up the Christmas tree, you know, that kind of thing. So that brings me to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of a ramble. You know, if you did, let me know. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you guys know when a new video comes out. I'm going to try to start doing every other Saturday now. I was doing every Saturday, but that just got a little too hectic. So I'm going to try to do every other Saturday now. I've got lots more stuff. Oh boy. Oy. I've got lots more stuff planned for future projects. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Oh, where's the button? You know, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we're gonna like skip over that part, Catherine. Editing, Catherine. We're gonna skip over that. Okay. All right. So, you know, once again, I will try to do that around here, somewhere over here, or I'll just have them linked down below.